Most of my life, I'd had a problem with picking men that were not good for me, so much so that I even had a phrase for it: saving the world, one moron at a time. One of my more spectacularly bad choices was a guy by the name of Derek. I met Derek when I was working one of my 2 jobs at the local mall. He worked somewhere else in the mall, so we hit it off, and soon enough we were in a relationship. Within a few months, my lease was up, and we ended up moving in together. In hindsight, this was a huge mistake, but I was dumb and lonely. Soon enough, red flags began to fly. He would say things in common conversation that were simply incorrect, like there were only 4 continents and the rest were actually owned by the Martian government and thus didn't count. When challenged, he would circular talk until you either agreed with him or dropped the subject. He would also make claims that seemed entirely unbelievable. When I asked where he had been staying before his mom's house, he said he camped in the woods. When I asked how he did that for months on end without any gear, he simply gestured to himself and said, "This is all the gear I need." The worst trait, though, by far, was his epic laziness. I had never witnessed someone so lazy in my life. Derek was unemployed for over a third of our relationship and would simply sit in the apartment watching Netflix DVDs or playing some war game on his computer. Actually, my spare computer, typing away in the group chat. He would never clean up after himself, leaving dirty dishes in the sink and filth on every surface while only taking a shower, maybe once a week. The smell that permeated my apartment could only be described as revolting and could easily gag a maggot. I would inquire a few times a week on his job hunt, only to be dismissed or given a growing amount of excuses. But I don't have a car. How would I get there? The bus doesn't run in that area. The internet went down, so I couldn't apply. The excuses were endless. Meanwhile, I was working double and triple shifts at my job to try to make up the lost income and running him all over town in my off time, getting applications, helping him fill them out and turn them in. Keep in mind, he didn't have a cell phone, so all of these applications had my contact info on them. Thus began the era of him holding my phone while I was at work, so he could make calls or schedule interviews, as well as I could get a hold of him from my store phone if I needed to. Things began getting weird. He began staying up later and later on this group chat, sometimes till almost dawn. Sometimes we would hang out all evening until it was time for bed. Then, he would always make some excuse about why he needed to check the game before bed, and he'd be right there. Hours would pass with no Derek. I began to get suspicious, but nothing incriminating seemed to be taking place, so I just shrugged it off as me being insecure. Then he started asking to use my car to go see his best friend Marcus. Now, I wasn't super comfortable with this, but I did know Marcus pretty well, and we got along almost better than Derek and I did. So, to a degree, I trusted Marcus more than Derek and agreed to it. This happened a few times while I was working the evening shift, and he was always back at the allotted time with my car and my phone, and relatively grateful for the opportunity to hang with his friends. Suspicious? Yes. But I was the kind of person who was loyal and trusting to a fault. 5. I didn't assume anything without proof, and from every angle, all seemed to be on the up and up. So, I took it at face value. One day he asked to borrow my car to go with his friends to a card gaming tournament. He put on a great show, telling me how the prize money would help us out, and with the deck he had, there was no way he could lose. I just had to let him use my car and phone this one last time, and he would be able to buy himself a phone with the prize money. I wasn't a huge fan of the idea, but nothing untoward had occurred in the previous instances, and I didn't feel like spending my only day off at a card game convention that I literally couldn't care less about. So I acquiesced. I bought myself a couple energy drinks and some vodka and had my own little personal drunk party. Hours ticked by and no Derek. 6. Eventually I passed out, only to wake up at the crack of dawn violently sick. This went way beyond a hangover. I started retching in the bathroom until there was nothing left but bile, but the retching wouldn't stop. Hours ticked by and I lay on my bathroom floor sweating and convulsing with no phone, no car, and no Derek. I eventually was able to crawl to my room and wrap myself in a bathrobe before crawling down my apartment building stairs and began knocking on the closest doors. It took 3 apartments before someone opened the door and allowed me to use their phone to call my mom. My mother was at my apartment in 6 minutes flat and rushed me to the emergency room, where I was diagnosed with an aggressive and antibiotic-resistant strain of C. diff. Derek finally showed up later that afternoon, phone and car keys in hand, looking very concerned and claiming to be deeply apologetic. But my mom hated him from that point on. 7, I was out of the hospital and back to work within a few days, but it was the beginning of the end. During these last months, we were constantly scraping by due to his lack of consistent income and poor spending habits. There were jobs gotten, and there were jobs lost for various reasons throughout our relationship. But the final job was one I helped him get, literally 3 buildings down from my own workplace. This company rented furniture and electronics on a weekly or monthly basis, and I happened to know most of the employees and the hiring manager as they were regular customers at my coffee establishment. I was able to use what little sway I had to get him hired there, and he accepted a job as a delivery man. Within a few weeks, I came home from work to find a brand new TV and entertainment system, and him grinning like an idiot. I told him we couldn't afford this. We could barely afford to eat, and were surviving off scraps I brought home from work. He talked about his amazing employee discount and assured me it was no big deal, that the rental fee would just come out of his check. I was furious. Not only had he not consulted me, he also had me on the account as well. My information had been taken from the credit application I filled out as a favor to help their numbers, so if he flaked, I was liable. Fast forward another few weeks, the rent was late, and we were receiving eviction notices on our door. I came home from work, and the TV was mysteriously gone. Thank goodness, I thought. He finally realized we can't afford it and took it back. He got paid, rent got paid, and all was as good as it could be, until I found a pawn slip for the TV in his pocket as I was doing laundry and went ballistic. He assured me he had plans to get it back in the works and not to worry about it. It would be taken care of soon, and no one would be the wiser. I was too pissed to catch on to the secrecy aspect of the situation. A few more tense weeks went by with him working mornings and myself working evenings while we shared one phone and car. Until that fateful day arrived. I woke up that morning with a migraine headache and opted to let Derek take the car, but leave me the phone so I could call someone later for a ride to work. A few hours of uncomfortable sleep went by before I was awoken by my phone. I answered, still groggy. Hello? There was a long pause on the other end of the line until a female voice asked, is Derek there? I felt a sickening feeling in my gut and began to shake. Was this real? Was I dreaming? No, he's at work right now. This is his wife, I lied. Is there something I can help you with? I wasn't rude. I phrased it as a genuine question rather than an accusation. Another long pause before she began to stammer about maybe she had the wrong number. But it was obvious she just wanted to get off the phone with me as quickly as possible. I realized in that moment that I desperately needed her. Please, I said with an edge of desperation in my voice. I don't know what's going on, but I just really need somebody to tell me the truth. The last word came out in a sob, and I sat there for a moment in silence, trying to quell the urge to just cry uncontrollably. Listen, the voice on the other end was almost gentle. I need to make a few phone calls, but I promise you I will call you back. She said it calmly and with so much conviction that I really wanted to believe her. Please, you promise? I almost begged. I promise, she replied. Okay, I took a deep breath and released it. I'll talk to you soon. And hung up. I then proceeded to aggressively pace my living room floor, staring at my phone while chain smoking and muttering to myself like a crazy person. I knew who she was calling. I was replaying all those little red flag moments in my head from the last few months, pinning down dates or behavior I'd found suspect when the phone rang again. It was her. I froze for a moment, shocked she followed through and called me back, terrified of what this meant. I answered the phone, and what followed was about the most soul-crushing 45 minutes of my life. After initial introductions, Rachel and I began comparing stories, and it became glaringly obvious what was happening. They had actually been in a relationship several years prior, and had run back into each other on the aforementioned war game. They began to flirt on the group chat. All those nights he'd been on the computer, he'd been chatting with her. All those times he'd gone to hang out with his friends, he'd been using my car to take her out and my phone to communicate with her. The time I was sick and alone with no resources, you guessed it, he was with her. Oh, but it got better. "Do you have a little silver hummingbird necklace?" she inquired. "Yes, my mother gave it to me for my 27th birthday, actually. I love it." "Really?" she said, "'cause he gave me one for Mother's Day." Oh my God. I almost yelled into the phone as I ran to my room and tore through my jewelry box. It wasn't in there. It was around her neck. From there, we discovered not only had he been giving her my property as gifts, but he'd had her over to our apartment, passing it off as his own. 13. I didn't want to believe him capable of doing something so cruel and disrespectful when I had allowed him to sponge off me for the better part of 3 years. Unfortunately, as confirmation, she began describing my apartment to a T, all the way down to my bed sheets. Rachel said he even pulled my secret box from beneath my bed and offered to use my adult items on her. She said she found it weird and didn't partake, but I threw them away due to the sheer ick factor. Finally, she uttered the words I didn't know I wanted to hear. "You know what we should do? We should bust him together." My mind immediately started racing. Indeed, we should. I was a mix of fury, adrenaline, and despair, so my thinking wasn't exactly straight, and details begin to get hazy here. We arranged to meet up at my work and find a way to lure Derek over there. Unfortunately, she lived about 40 minutes away, whereas I only lived about 6 miles from our destination. 14. If I got there first, I'd need to stall him, assuming he wasn't out on a delivery. I called a trusted coworker of mine at work, sobbing and begging for a ride. To his everlasting credit, he got somebody to cover and left work to come get me and bring me to my car. When I got to Derek's workplace, I went inside to retrieve my keys. This wasn't uncommon, as they knew the car was mine and was stopped halfway through the store by Derek's manager, wanting to talk about the payment due on our account. I don't remember the exact dialogue, but I said something along the lines of, "Look, I don't know when you are going to get your payment." I looked utterly defeated and told him we could never afford the TV in the first place, and how I had begged Derek to take it back. Now we didn't have it anymore, as Derek had pawned it, and I didn't have the money to get it out, let alone pay him. I was full-on blubbering at this point when he stopped me to clarify that his employee pawned a rental TV under contract. I confirmed that this was indeed true and presented him with the pawn ticket. He was furious. Apparently, such an act was illegal and was grounds for immediate termination, but he assured me that if I could get the TV back to him, there would be no harm, no foul, and he would terminate my contract without any penalties. I thanked him for his understanding and told him to let Derek know I would be over at my workplace. My heart was pounding in my chest and blood was roaring in my ears. What was I going to say? What was he going to say? Would Rachel make it here before he did? My heart sank when I saw Derek's hulking form making its way in my direction. I frantically scanned the parking lot for Rachel's car. She wasn't here yet, and I was out of time. He hit the door looking out of breath and guilty as hell, and I just stared at him stone-faced. I walked outside silently to light a cigarette, unsure of exactly what to say, and he followed me wordlessly. He started in with the "it's not what it seems," and "it's all just a terrible misunderstanding," and I just let him dig himself deeper into his hole of lies. I listened, I nodded, I pretended to understand until a particular car pulled into view. Rachel parked in the space directly next to where we were standing and got out of the car. "Hey Derek, how you doing?" Derek had gone visibly pale. He hung his head and sat down on the curb, saying nothing to either of us. Rachel and I greeted each other and awkwardly shook hands before again returning our attention to Derek. Rachel began berating him on his lies and deceit, unveiling all of our mutual information and subsequent conclusions, while I stood mostly in silence, agreeing at the appropriate times, but mostly still in shock. After 20 minutes of this, I finally mustered up the courage to take my stand. We are done. I don't want to see you ever again. I'll pack up your things, only 2 boxes worth, and your sister can contact me in a few days to pick them up. Now I want your key." I held out my hand and looked at him. "Not until I get my stuff out, then you get your key," he replied. I tried to argue, but he continued to refuse and used his large stature to his advantage, knowing I'd have no chance in a physical altercation. He turned and walked away, heading back toward his workplace. Rachel and I talked a little more before she handed me my hummingbird necklace and left. I stood there alone, staring at nothing, trying to wrap my head around what had just transpired. And then I cried. Oh, how I cried. With nowhere else to turn, I had only one call to make to my mom. The moment she answered, I unleashed this deluge of words at her that were half sobs and half rant. "Stay right there, I'm coming," she said. God bless my mother. Soon enough, both of my parents pulled up in my dad's truck, and my mom got out to comfort me and give me hugs. I looked at the driver's seat and saw my father with his jaw clenched and a death grip on the steering wheel while staring straight ahead. Oh crap. They took me to the pawn shop, and my parents wrote a check for more than $500 to get the TV out. We then drove straight over to Derek's workplace and returned the TV to the manager. As the manager finished up the cancellation paperwork, my dad spotted Derek pacing around the back of the parking lot, talking frantically on the phone. Unfortunately, I didn't get to hear the ensuing conversation, but my dad returned within a few minutes holding my house key and looking victorious. "I believe this is yours," he said as he handed me the key and then pulled me into a hug. I cried a little into his shoulder. My dad gave me a squeeze, kissed my temple, and whispered into my ear, "They're firing him." I leaned back to look at my dad, and he just smirked and said, "Now he's jobless and homeless." I thought about it for a second before I said in my most sarcastic tone, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." We laughed about it a little, and my parents gave me some words of wisdom before leaving me to drive myself home, where my best friend was already waiting to keep me company. Derek and his sister showed up a few days later for his pitiful boxes of stuff. He tried to talk to me, to explain, but my best friend descended on him like a harpy if he muttered more than a few syllables in my direction, so he was shut down almost immediately. He left that night, and I have never heard from him since. I blocked him on social media, but there was really no need, as he made no effort to contact me on any level. That was Derek, ever lazy, ever deluded, and always selfish. Looking back on the entire experience years later, I could see clearly how I'd been manipulated and used. Derek had never intended to be a partner in our relationship. He'd been looking for a caretaker, a sugar mama, someone to subsidize his lazy lifestyle while he did whatever he pleased. The red flags had been there from the beginning. The ridiculous lies about camping in the woods with no gear, the bizarre claims about Martian governments, the complete unwillingness to contribute to our household in any meaningful way. But I'd ignored them all because I was lonely and thought I could help him, could save him from himself. It was my save the world, one moron at a time pattern playing out in spectacular fashion. The experience with Derek certainly took its toll. I lost a lot of weight due to lack of appetite and had a myriad of trust issues moving forward. But the point is, I moved forward. I couldn't let Derek's betrayal define me or destroy my ability to love and trust again. It took time, months of processing, of talking to friends, of working through the anger and hurt. I had to accept that I'd made mistakes in judgment, that I'd ignored obvious warning signs, that I'd let my desire to not be alone override my common sense. But I also had to accept that Derek's choices were his own. His laziness, his dishonesty, his cruelty, none of that was my fault. I hadn't caused him to cheat or steal or lie. Those were his decisions, and he had to live with the consequences. The confrontation outside my workplace had been cathartic in a way I hadn't expected. Seeing him sit on that curb, head hung low, unable to defend himself or talk his way out of the situation, for once it gave me closure. Rachel's willingness to team up with me instead of blaming me or competing with me had been a gift. We could have turned on each other, let Derek play us against one another. Instead, we'd joined forces and taken him down together. There was something empowering about that, about two women refusing to let a man pit them against each other. and instead choosing solidarity. My parents' support had been crucial too. My mom's immediate response to come get me, my dad's quiet fury and determination to get my house key back, their willingness to pay over $500 to get that TV out of Hawk. All of it showed me that I had people in my corner who loved me unconditionally. Derek had tried to isolate me, to make himself the center of my world. But when it came down to it, my real support system had been there, ready to help me escape. The fact that Derek lost his job that same day felt like cosmic justice. He'd pawned a rental TV, committed theft from his employer, and now he was paying the price. He was jobless, homeless, and had lost both women in his life within the span of a few hours. Everything had collapsed for him in a single day, all because of his own actions. I didn't feel guilty about that. He'd made his choices, and now he was living with them. I had grown leaps and bounds as a person since that experience, and was truly content with where my life was now. Here I was, many years later, happily married to my high school sweetheart and the mother of 2 beautiful little boys. I'd broken my pattern of choosing the wrong men, of trying to save people who didn't want to be saved. I'd learned to value myself, to recognize red flags, to trust my instincts. My husband was everything Derek wasn't: hardworking, honest, loyal, supportive. He was a true partner, someone who contributed equally to our household and our family. Sometimes when I was drifting off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder, whatever happened to good old Derek? Was he out there somewhere in the woods with a stick, and his wits as his only gear, waiting for the Martian government to make its move? The thought made me smile. More likely, he'd found some other woman to sponge off of, some other person to manipulate and use. People like Derek rarely changed. They just moved on to the next victim, the next opportunity to take advantage of someone's kindness. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I'd escaped, I'd healed, and I'd built a life I was proud of. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about self-worth, about recognizing manipulation, about the importance of not ignoring red flags just because you're lonely or want to help someone. It had taught me that love shouldn't be exhausting, that relationships should be partnerships, not caretaking situations. It had taught me that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is walk away. I'd also learned about the power of women supporting each other. Rachel could have been my enemy. We could have fought over Derek, blamed each other, made the situation even messier. Instead, she'd called me back like she promised, spent 45 minutes on the phone comparing stories with me, agreed to drive 40 minutes to help confront him, and returned my necklace. She'd been a stranger, someone who owed me nothing, yet she'd chosen solidarity over competition. That had stayed with me over the years, influencing how I interacted with other women, how I approached conflicts. The confrontation itself had been messy and emotional, but ultimately necessary. Seeing Derek unable to talk his way out of the situation, watching him lose everything in real time because of his own choices, it had given me a sense of closure I might not have gotten otherwise. I hadn't had to wonder what happened or if he'd suffered any consequences. I'd seen it all unfold, and then I'd walked away and never looked back. As I tucked my 2 boys into bed each night, kissed my husband goodnight, and reflected on the life I'd built, I felt nothing but gratitude that I'd gotten out when I did. Derek was a chapter in my past, a cautionary tale, a lesson learned, and I was finally, truly free.